Okay, Chaz, let's get right to it. Terry Francona is always clear that he only cares about today's game, never looks ahead. But after the Reds finally beat the White Sox on Thursday, he went about as far as he's ever willing to go when it comes to kind of looking ahead, at least a little bit, when he said, today's win is a place to start. Now we've got to back it up. And kind of where do the Reds go from here was clearly top of mind for Francona post-game on Thursday because he dropped that same phrase two more times, three times total. He said, we got to back it up. So my question is this, did this stretch and then losing 2 of 3 to the White Sox, did that kind of test the limits maybe of this team or push them to a point of trying to figure out even more some of the inconsistencies offensively we've seen from this team? Did you get any sense of that post-game on Thursday?
It's accepting it, it's addressing it, it's being over a quarter into the season and still looking for the things that you can really hang your hat on. In addition to that, my biggest takeaway from post game on Thursday was Matt McClain basically saying, "For us to be a good team, he said me and Ellie have to be doing our thing," and they haven't for the majority of the season. I do like what I'm seeing from them over the last week or two. That keeps going back to the theme. What can the Reds hang their hat on? Do they have a middle of the lineup they can count on? Who are the guys they can expect something from and get some upside from? Maybe, just maybe, that's a guy we'll talk about a bit more later in this show. But that was the theme, especially from McClain and Ellie on Thursday.
You said last time we talked that for all the good additions to this team of the offseason, this is still a team with certain cornerstones, and it's a team that's going to succeed when those certain players, two of whom you just mentioned, play well. That's key for this team, and I think you're exactly right on that. They did have a meeting. I mean, you hear about meetings. They had a meeting pregame. Will Benson said that they got together before the game Thursday against the White Sox and said, hey, look, we're doing a lot of the right things. We just have to keep doing those things. And then that resulted certainly with what Terry Francona called a good, crisp baseball game that got him back on track and got him back in the win column against the White Sox. Welcome to Power Stacks. It's good to see Chaz from the world headquarters of Charlie's Chalkboard. As always, locked and loaded, ready to go. It's going to be a fun show. Coming up on the show, can the Reds turn things around? Oh, we got to cue the dramatic music. I know it'll be there. Can the Reds turn things around, and can they do it Big Willie style? Right, Chaz? A deep dive on this show on Will Benson 2.0 and his return to the Reds lineup. Also, why Austin Hayes is part of a select group in Major League Baseball that we'll call the All Hands team. The story behind the calluses and the old school grip of a man who plays the game at the highest level, sans batting gloves. And a prospect alert for the Reds. And the player comp for said prospect that may raise some eyebrows. There'll be context to that, but Chaz has that. It's all coming up on the show. And if I failed to mention it, we are proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. So that sets us up. The leadoff spot right now. Here's the first part of our deep dive, Chaz. It was a tough Tuesday for TJ Friedl in the series opener against the White Sox. He was hit by pitch on his left arm early in the game and then jammed his right arm in a collision with Elly De La Cruz that resulted in a bone bruise and hopefully for the Reds, a short-term absence for TJ Friedl from the lineup. But what it did was he was replaced mid-game by Will Benson and thus opened the door for Benson to finish that game and then get a couple of starts in center field. So our deep dive on Benson with you starts where?
I think you have to start with how much had to happen for Benson to get an opportunity this season. He wasn't even in the competition for the final two roster spots as Dunn and Hurtubise and the loser Fairchild tried to battle that out. They let Jake Fraley play through a long slump. They let Dunn and Hurtubise play through their struggles. They gave Tyler Callahan a shot, even though he had barely played the outfield before his brief stint with the Reds. And then it took TJ Friedl kind of getting banged up in the middle of that game and then now missing the next two for Benson to even get an opportunity to show what he can do in 25. That was the bottom of the steep hill that Benson started this year on. And we'll get to where he's been and where he's going. But At the end of the day, Benson got a chance just like he did in 2023. He does have a much different mentality than he did back in 2023.
All right, this show's going to be about Will Benson. So as we get into it, let's go back for some context first into the player that Will Benson has been in the past, how he's been thought of, and how he landed with the Reds in the position that he's in right now. Will Benson in 2016 was a first round pick, 14th overall by Cleveland out of high school in Georgia. And just for some other names, that was a draft that wasn't loaded with can't miss prospects. You look at some of the names right now, and a lot of those first round picks don't jump off the page. In that same draft, the Reds took Nick Senzel, second overall. The Dodgers took Benson's now teammate Gavin Lux at number 20 in that draft. But Will Benson comes out of Atlanta, and he's left-handed, obviously, long and athletic. And one of the pre-draft evaluations actually made the comp to Jason Hayward from Atlanta, left-handed, kind of the same build. But one of those pre-draft evaluations said about Benson, talented, athletic, tries to do too much at times. I think a lot of players early on with that kind of skill set playing against inferior competition, it might come off that way sometime, but he's intriguing as a prospect, and he was a top prospect for the Guardians early on. Made his debut in Cleveland August of 22, but then Charlie was in Cincinnati the very next season after just 28 big league games with Cleveland. The deal that sent him from Cleveland to Cincinnati at a young age for a first-round pick, and then the rest of kind of the trajectory for his career started at that point.
Benson was Cleveland pretty much gave up on Benson. A lot of the concerns and a lot of the flaws that you see in his game is what Cleveland wasn't a fan of. They traded him for two prospects who are now not prospects, pretty much out of the picture. In 2023, Benson then comes up and he's 0 for 16 or 1 for 16 maybe. I always say in that April of 23 with the Reds, the most lost I've ever seen a hitter be. He then gets optioned, gets to work on some stuff, comes up in late May only because Will Myers, remember him, had a kidney stone. And so they needed someone to just come up for a couple of days, fill a spot on the bench and see what happened. And Benson got like a pitch hit at bat in Chicago and he looked good. And then TJ Friedel had a minor, I believe it was an oblique injury, and kind of he was banged up. So Benson then gets his shot at Fenway Park in 2023, hits a triple to left field. From that game on, he was truly one of the best 20 hitters in baseball in 2023. So in 2024, he's like, all right, this is an all-star type season. This is a prove it type season. This is a chance to be a superstar for someone, no, not a superstar, but a star for someone who has as much raw talent as you'll see outside of Ellie De La Cruz, as much pure athleticism as you'll see. And then in 24, he was one of the worst players in baseball. He was very, very close to being sent down to AAA at multiple times. The pressure mounted, and he didn't meet the pressure. So in 2025, understandably, he was competing for the final roster spot in spring training, but I don't even know that Benson quite recognized that at the time. He still saw himself as an everyday player. So to get to our first soundbite, I interviewed Benson in February. Here's where his head was at. He was still clinging to the big goals of 2023. Listen to kind of what Benson's mindset was entering this season.
Yes and no. Like, yes, obviously, I feel like, each and every one of us are competing for a spot in some form or fashion. I feel like if you ever get too complacent, that's when the game will quickly show you. So, I'm always competing for a spot, consistent by a time, of course. But, again, my main focus is executing my process so that I can just put myself in a position and data to get my best chance to play well.
I'm competing for consistent playing time, of course, is where Benson's head was at. And he added later in that interview, last year will be a stepping stone to my greatness. And now, of course, all this didn't play out how he hoped. He didn't make the team, an early cut from camp. He had to go to AAA. And that kind of brings us to phase two, kind of Benson entering 2025, the regular season.
When Benson struggled as much as he did in 2024, the way you just described, and it was tough to watch at times, his answer and certainly the Reds' answer, I guess, for him a lot of the time was stick to the process, do what I can, do my routine, stick to the process, keep working. he's 25 years old and he's experiencing failure at the big league level as a first round pick. And so that was the answer then. But then at the start, as you pointed out, of this season or in spring training, when the plan changed, when he wasn't going to get right away those opportunities in the big leagues that he hoped to get with that process, then something had to change. And when he went down to Louisville, Eric Davis, whose name is going to come up in this conversation and was on the broadcast on Pete Rose night at Great American Ballpark, was on the game broadcast with John Sadak and Barry Larkin. He said that he recognized that in Will Benson, and he said, so we got in the lab and worked on some things because you can't be afraid of change. And Will Benson has this moment with the encouragement of Eric Davis that, hey, man, it's time to change. The process that you've used, the process that you struggled with last year isn't working right now. And Davis said that Benson was all in. And so the work started from that point, and Eric Davis did a lot of this to transform and make over Benson's stance, his swing, his approach. And he started working with that at Louisville, and the numbers would indicate had some pretty great success in Louisville early on when he was still there.
The numbers terrific in Louisville, and we can talk about how he uses the hands. But to me, what this kind of is a human story. It's someone who failed at their job under an incredibly bright spotlight, and the pressure intensines where it's slapped him in the face. A year like that weighs on you and challenges you and tests you. And there's almost an acceptance and a growth and kind of just a new lens on looking at anything in anyone's life whenever you go through something like that, and then try to completely start over from the bottom of that hill. And that's where Benson kind of recognized where he was at. So we heard Benson and how he sounded heading into the season, and then he went through all this, not making the team, accepting that he needed to make changes and making them significantly. And Benson's gone through a lot of growth, and his mindset has changed a lot. So listen to him here. I asked Will Benson, was your confidence tested at any point?
I think what was tested more is my ability to show up every day consistently and being the same guy every day. My confidence wasn't tested because I put my confidence in preparation and the process. So what was tested was my ability to just take what I've been given and show it the same way every day. And thank God that I did that.
He feels like he did that. And he feels like that's a big piece of what translated into the statistical success that he was having in Louisville. But then, as all these other guys get called up and as the Reds offense struggles, I asked Will, what was it like when you weren't the guy getting called up when you were performing well?
I just chalk it up to the game. And I'm big on my faith, and God has a plan for me. God has a way that He wants my career to play out, and so in that moment, it's like I said, how well can I show up and just be the same guy that training and play, and really just be grateful for where I am, because I could be somewhere else, and so I'm just great.
There's an appreciation there. Brian,
Yeah.
what were your thoughts on that perspective from Will?
Well, my thought is that Will Benson, from the time he got here and we've known him, he's had swagger, right? He's had a confidence that oozes from players like him, and you love that. But how many times do you hear the biggest star in the game, right down to the player making his debut, they say, man, this game humbles you. And I don't know to what extent that happened with Will Benson, but I certainly think his perspective changed some. If you're the Reds, if you're Terry Francona, you don't want somebody to lose their swagger. You don't want somebody to lose their confidence. But there is a part of the game and a growth with young players that comes from failure, not having success, responding to that a certain way. And I think just in the tone of his interview with you, you can tell that he has a little bit better sense of that now moving forward, and a sense of where he's been, what it's like to see some of those things go away, and now to have that opportunity again. Because Terry Francona said as recently as Thursday after the White Sox game. We told him when he went down that he was going to get an opportunity again when he deserved it, when he earned it. But knowing the game and knowing the player the way that Francona did, he said, you're going to get that opportunity again. Will Benson could have had a much different reaction to that. You've seen players go down and sulk. You've seen first-round picks feel like, I'm a first-round pick. Maybe some of this doesn't apply to me. It clearly applies to everyone. It's a humbling game, and here he is again so far early in this opportunity, saying the right things and, more importantly, playing the right way.
I think you can feel how the failure and the reassessment of his whole career and who he was has impacted him and is shaping him and is shaping the way he goes about his business, the process and preparation that he continues to talk about. And we'll hear at the end, we'll get to this in a bit, that the appreciation that he has and the gratitude, those being two defining things of just the way he's the way he's carrying himself and how he's approaching all of this, and kind of now moving forward, like, so Will Benson, what a game on Thursday. Double down the line. Homer as well. He made some really loud contact in Wednesday's game, as well as 3 standout catches. We still don't know if this swing adjustment's going to work, right? It looks good. The numbers were great in AAA, but the gap between AAA pitching is big league and big league pitching is so significant. But I think the the Eric Davis factor in this has helped Benson. He said he felt stiff last year. He
Yep.
feels more loose. He feels more fluid. And that to me as well kind of fits with the theme of this guy who's just more comfortable and is putting less stress on every swing.
Going back to Eric Davis, I agree with you on that. And I said earlier, some of the draft comps, or one of the draft comps for Will Benson, was Jason Hayward. Eric Davis took a player from his era, and he said Darryl Strawberry, left-handed hitter, athletic, tall, long. And he said he talked to Benson and made Benson look at photos and videos of players like Darryl Strawberry. And he said, look, you're 6'4", 6'5". Your hands are too high, you're too tight, and you can't hit from there. And, so he showed him these examples of some players who had success, who were similar to Benson in a lot of ways, and relaxing, lowering his hands. We could get really into the weeds about hitting and things that I don't know about. I can listen and hear what someone like Eric Davis or Chris Valaika says about hitting. That's not me. I haven't been there, done that. But it's such a drastic difference and such a noticeable difference in the way Will Benson stands in the box and is ready. And even, I think, to me, his swing looks more fluid and less abrupt. And so far it has worked. You said it's early. Of course it is. Davis said once he made those changes, he started using that and adjusting at the AAA level, and he produced. He said, but now, obviously, as you just pointed out, you get to the big league level, you have to continue to make those adjustments at the big league level and see if they still translate. And that's the next step. If he made all these changes and he can't make them stand and make them work at the big league level, the confidence in those changes starts to wane just a little bit. But I think he's gotten a good taste early on of something that will feed his confidence, because he's had some early success and he's had some early opportunities. He hasn't had to wait. And I know my good friend Charlie Goldsmith said, I think during the game on Thursday, if Will Benson gets going, that's something that significantly changes the outlook of this Reds offense. In what way?
Well, in 2023, I don't think it was any coincidence that Will Benson's ascension matched the Reds. There are 2 things that Benson does that not many Reds hitters do. You can see him just punish and bury a pitch into the right field seats in an intimidating way. And then also, like in 2023, I really believe he had the best plate discipline on the Reds. If he can and he's a long way, but if he can somehow get back to that, that's something the Reds need a lot more of. But that's where it all comes together, especially something like plate discipline and the power to getting off your best swing. Sure, that has to do with your mechanics, but it's more mental than anything. What this experience feels like with Benson is one mental obstacle course that he's been going on. That's what the game of baseball is. And that's why I keep coming back to his approach. That's why his approach and his mentality and what he's thinking through all this makes such a big difference. So here's our last piece of our interview with Benson. A few minutes of Benson talking about his mindset and how he's going to be approaching this stretch in the big leagues for the next, for the going forward. Coming up here, something to prove. How do you prevent that from weighing on you from the negative side of that and make sure that's all on there?
Yeah, I've surrendered whatever happens out here to God. So whatever happens out here, man, is a piece of cake to reality. What's in my manageable, what's in my control is preparing up, showing up, yeah, and doing the things to put myself in the best position. And then after that, it just what's gonna happen, and I'll feel day after day. I'll learn from what happened today, take it to tomorrow, report my best to tomorrow, and we go from there.
How much of your confidence comes you here? What does it mean to have? I mean, I know how many friends you have in here, take the support you have around you in here. What does that do for you?
I can support in any space, right? And just makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel wanted. And obviously a human desire or a human thing is to feel desired, to feel wanted, to feel welcome. And that's what it does for me. Which it would do for anybody.
Last thing, in 2023, you come up, you weren't going to play much. And then how do you do that again?
Man, I think it's just, again, just my faith.
Yeah.
A big thing is gratitude. I remember in 23, and it's very similar now. I'm just grateful to be there, not necessarily trying to do too much of what I'm given, right? Like it's already a blessing to be, to consider a big leaguer. So to be in this dugouts, to get the opportunity to play, you know what I mean? It's like, man, what an honor, what a blessing. So I think the biggest thing is just being grateful for every day that I get to work on my craft at the big league level. That's it.
I feel like in 2023 it was like Fenway. You hit some opposite field triple or something.
Yeah.
How exciting is tonight could be the night or tomorrow could be the night? That's exciting. All right, today could be a big day for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about baseball.
Yeah.
There's it could be any day. My focus isn't necessarily on that day. I think my focus is more towards the process and the heart of being a consistent hitter. I think that's where I'm gonna find my joy, my consistency.
So that interview with Benson was on Wednesday. And then on Thursday he has that monster game. He hasn't re-arrived yet, but it's definitely a start. And I really mean this too. I swear Benson really swears that the day in Fenway was what changed everything. It was the day the coaching staff started to believe in him. It was the day that he really started to believe in himself. So it was Thursday that day for Benson. I guess we'll never know unless he goes on a 4-month tear. But as he said, it could be any day, but that's not his focus. His focus is on the joy and the appreciation of being in the big leagues. And there's a pretty powerful lesson in that.
It is. And as you said, it's a human story. And he's an easy guy to pull for. And getting back to feeling like a ball player and feeling like a big league ball player and finding that joy. You saw that post game on Thursday. The front of his uniform, a day after Pete Rose night, the front of his uniform looked like Pete Rose. You couldn't read the logo. The pants were brown from the headfirst slide. He was dirty. He was sweaty, but he was back in the big leagues, and he was on top of his game for that game. And the Reds hope, and I agree with you, great sign. If he can contribute in some of those ways moving forward, that does change the Reds and certainly help them offensively and in the outfield because he's versatile, not just center field. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I like the deep dive on Will Benson, but we'll sneak in a few more nuggets here before we're done. Let's open Charlie's notebook and to an extent Geeze's notebook, his little green notebook that he totes around right now, because from the start of the season, I had a question and I went searching for answers. It starts this way. You can tell some things about a person in their handshake, right, Chaz? Don't you? You can
Of course. Oh, that's a conversation for another day.
Okay, good. It says a little bit about someone. So you shake hands with Austin Hayes, and you can tell right away because that dude's hands feel different. His grip feels different. Dusty Baker used to say you can kind of tell when someone develops into a good hitter because of the grip, their hands, their forearms. He would talk of some young player and he'd say his hands aren't strong enough yet. Austin Hayes is not that guy. Austin Hayes and his hands are strong enough. And you noticed early on in the season that he's a no batting gloves kind of guy. And that's some select company. You don't see that much around the bigs anymore. One of the guys who did it, Matt Carpenter, just retired. But their hands, that's different. So I went to Hayes and I said, man, there's got to be a story here. How long have you gone without batting gloves? And what led to the sans batting gloves, even in Major League Baseball? Here's what he said.
So I think I went to the no BGs when I was around 10 years old. That's when I first really started doing the travel ball thing, playing 5, 6, 7 games a weekend. I've messed this story up. My mom had to correct me and make sure that I tell it right from now on. So I felt bad that I was going through so many pairs of batting gloves every weekend because it's hot in Florida. It's humid. It rains. The fields are wet. So they get dried out. I would run bases with them on because half the time the fields would get dried out so fast because it was so hot. I'd rip them or they get soggy and start breaking down. So we're running through so many pairs of batting gloves every weekend playing all these games.
Yeah.
So finally I was like, I just won't wear them for a little while. And I just kind of stopped and never went back to them again. So it's been almost 20 years now.
Yeah. So do you have in-season hands and out-of-season hands? Because in-season, your hands, they got to be a wreck, right? Feel like leather.
Yeah, I love hitting, so I'm always hitting.
Okay.
And I lift a lot in the off season, so I get the barbell hands.
Yeah.
So the calluses, they stay pretty much year-round.
Yeah, you see Austin Hayes in a sleeveless T-shirt in the clubhouse. You'd never guess that he lifts a lot. Guy's ripped. But what a good kid, right? He was asking his mom, wanted to save his mom some money because he was tearing up all the gloves. Mom was probably awesome and driving him to travel ball everywhere and paying for gloves and paying for gear. And he wanted to ease that financial burden on gloves. And all these years later, here he is, still swinging it barehanded in big league baseball. Chaz, that's a good one.
Yeah, Austin Hayes, he's a guy too where, I mean, that kind of is the metaphor for who he is, right? Kind of this old school, but some like power and some know-how behind that through some experience to be able to tap into some strength. Not to call it old guy strength because he's not old, but it kind of is old guy strength in some way that Austin Hayes is doing successfully.
All right, we're not going to do a ton on prospects, but Chaz, you have something on a Reds prospect. What level is this, and what caught your attention about said prospect?
So I love prospects in the draft and all that stuff. And so I keep tabs, and also Reds Twitter is doing a great job shouting this out as well. Tyson Lewis, the second-round pick of the Reds last season. I see that he hits a ball tracked with 119 mile per hour exit velocity. The only people in the big leagues who have hit a ball 119 this season are O'Neill Cruz and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And so I check in with the source. I put on my my reporting hat and I go, all right, you do get some misreadings. Like Hunter Green was once tracked throwing a 106 mile an hour pitch. And did he? I guess we'll never know. I go, was this 119 really 119? And the answer I got was, the Reds saw the video. It looked hard, it looked sharp. But on film, you can't really tell if it's 119 versus 112 and the gun said, 119, but they're also not perfect. So the answer I got was, I guess we'll only know if he does it again, right? That's what you need. You need a bigger sample size, like any baseball statistician. So then last night, Tyson Lewis doesn't just hit a grounder 109. Well, all right. He doesn't just hit a grounder. The grounder was 119. He hits a 114.8 mile per hour exit velocity on a homer. And that's ridiculous. Here are the people that hit 114 plus in the big leagues this year. That's Vlad Jr., O'Neill Cruz, Shohei, James Wood, Aaron Judge, Schwarber, Junior Caminero, who's the best player most fans haven't heard of, Ryan Mountcastle, Jordan Walker, Hunter Goodwin, Corbin Carroll, Luis Robert, Mike Trout, Ellie De La Cruz. It was almost an identical exit velocity as to what Ellie De La Cruz had in that game-tying 9th inning home run the other day. And the video of the home run came out, and you can see Cam Collier, who's there on a rehab assignment. he puts his hands on his head, and that in shock. And that to me is a sign of proof of the 114. So I checked in with the source. All right, like Tyson Lewis, you got to be pretty excited, right? And kind of the feedback I got was he's really finding the barrel. Obviously, he's a physical kid. He's really growing and filling out. It's been fun to watch so far. He's naturally athletic with a really good frame and some strength that's clearly in there. And so, I mean, he was a quote unquote cold weather shortstop. You know, the line is when you draft someone from a guy who doesn't live in the South, there's all this untapped potential because they didn't get to
Right.
play baseball year round. So when they do, you kind of never know. It's kind of a mystery box. What are you going to get? How much room is there? And for Tyson Lewis to show up and be posting these exit velocities, I can tell you, it's not just me. This has caught a lot of people's attention because it's very rare company that he has just joined.
The name is Tyson Lewis. Remember the name, and we'll follow and see where it goes. Finish it up with this. Rivalry weekend in Major League Baseball is what they're calling it. So you get some of the in-state stuff, some of the, Phillies, Pirates. You're going to get Cubs, White Sox. And at Great American Ballpark, you're going to get Reds and Guardians. So my one question isn't even really about the game. It's, will Terry Francona be able to, as much as is within his control, not make himself a huge part of the story this weekend the way he successfully did in spring training, right? Because it's going to come up. How do you think he's going to handle it?
Well, here's something. So coming out of the post game press conference on Thursday, as he's leaving the room, kind of as he's closing the door, and I forget what the specific line was, but he says like, "All right, time for the Ohio Cup." Francona said as he exited the room. So I think he knows that he has the secret sauce to win the Ohio Cup because of how Cleveland under Francona dominated that series for all of
Right.
these years. Um, I'm most interested to see how much time Tito spends on the field, kind of doing the quote unquote hug fest. That's my big question that I'm looking forward to seeing. And I mean, he'll answer all the questions and all that kind of stuff, but I'm curious how much he wants the spotlight to be on it kind of publicly with what he does in front of the open stadium.
Yeah. Hug Fest was the term that came out of spring training when he assigned himself an alternate game when the Reds were opening up with the Guardians. So now you got it during the regular season. It's going to be fun to watch. Hope to see you at Great American Ballpark. We finish up by saying tell a friend, subscribe, rate, like. This thing's picking up steam. We hope you're along for the ride. For producer Kent, I'm Geese. That's Chaz. Thanks for checking out Power Stacks. We'll see you next time.